Seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog, and yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello, welcome to the briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. It's Wednesday, it's noon, it's normally Prime Minister's Questions, but Parliament isn't sitting, so we bring you fantasy PMQs with the ex-Conservative MP Ed Vaizey and ex-Labour MP Mel On. The rail strikes are on today. Again, we'll hear from Jeremy Corbyn and the RMT boss. And tomorrow, the Commonwealth Games starts in Birmingham. We'll speak to the West Midlands Mayor Andy Street. First, it is your news with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 12 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Commuters are facing significant travel disruption across the country today as rail workers go on strike again. More than 40,000 members of the RMT union and 14 train operators have walked out in a long-running dispute now over jobs, pay and conditions. Picket lines have been formed outside stations across the country. Network Rail says only 20% of services are running. Travellers are being urged not to travel unless absolutely necessary. RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch told us that government cuts are to blame.
He wants massive cuts. When he wanted the railway workers to keep working and put themselves in a place of danger, in effect, he wanted to talk to us. Now he's using COVID and the effects of COVID as a reason to cut back on the railway. He's cut £2 billion worth of funding from the National Rail, and he's cutting £2 billion from London Underground, in effect. Now that's causing massive disruption, and it's that funding cut that he's responsible for that is causing these disputes. If we can get back to a proper funding level and he allows the companies to negotiate properly, we will get a settlement to this dispute. But he's got the key.
The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, told us he can't believe the attitude of the unions.
Every one of your viewers watching has paid £600 from their household to keep every railway worker in a job, not even on furlough, during the coronavirus. There are employers and there are unions. They're the only people who can settle these strikes. This is just a game they play in order to divert attention from the fact that they are the ones calling the strikes.
England are through to the Women's Euro 2022 final after beating Sweden 4-0 at Bramall Lane. It was Beth Mead, Lucy Bronze, Alessia Russo and Fran Kirby who all scored, ending a 13-year run of defeats in the final four of the major tournaments that the team got into. The Lionesses will now face either France or Germany in the final on Sunday at Wembley. MPs are accusing Rishi Sunak of making a U-turn after he pledged to cut VAT on domestic energy bills if he becomes Prime Minister. Unveiling his new winter plan to tackle inflation and the cost of living, the former Chancellor said he'd scrap the VAT if the price cap exceeds £3,000. The announcement's been criticised as Mr Sunak's repeatedly accused Ms Truss of offering unfunded tax cuts. The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, told us, though, he welcomes Sunak's change of heart.
The reason he's doing that is because he's under pressure. He knows that his tax-raising agenda isn't working. To me, it seems strange that anybody could aspire to the Tory leadership, essentially advocating tax rises, but that's up to him. But I think he suddenly realised that he's on very dodgy ground there and is now flipping back to saying that VAT should be abolished or reduced on energy bills. That's the fairy tale, and I think he's come very late to that party.
The Foreign Secretary's promised to publish police league tables if she wins the leadership race. Liz Truss will also ask forces to cut crime by 20% and, as she says, spend their time investigating real crimes, not Twitter rows and hurt feelings. Ms Truss said her government would make sure homicide, serious violence and neighbourhood crime are all reduced by a fifth by the end of this Parliament. The government's drive to recruit an extra 20,000 police officers in England and Wales by next March has slowed down considerably in the last 3 months. Home Office figures show that 214 officers were recruited in the last 3 months. It had been 2,500 extra officers recruited in the 3 months before that. That brings the total number now to just over 13,500 officers. Recruiting additional police officers was a key pledge by the Conservatives in the 2019 general election, as they promised to cut crime across England and Wales. A McDonald's cheeseburger is no longer 99p. The fast food giants increased the price for the first time in more than 14 years, blaming rising costs and inflation. It's now 20 pence more expensive, coming in at £1.19. In a statement, McDonald's says a number of items on sale in its UK restaurants will go up in price from anything to 10 to 20 pence. It's the latest company to announce increasing prices after inflation hit 40-year high. This is GB News, and I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head to Gloria for the briefing.
Coming up this hour on the briefing, Parliament is in recess, but we are awash with politics. The battle to be our next Prime Minister, the cost of living crisis, and yet another rail strike. We kick off today with fantasy Prime Minister's questions in place of the real thing, with former Conservative Minister Lord Ed Vaizey and former Labour MP Melanie On. Were your travel plans scuppered by yet another rail strike this morning? We have an interview with rail boss Mick Lynch and also the former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. We'll talk with West Midlands Mayor Andy Street about the Commonwealth Games, which kick off in Birmingham tomorrow. Labour MP Stephen Timms joins me to discuss the cost of living. He's chair of the Work and Pensions Committee. And Meg Hillier, chair of the Public Accounts Select Committee, tells me how £777 million of taxpayers' money was, sloppily, awarded to Randox for COVID testing. There's a very critical report out today. Well, Parliament is in recess for the summer, so of course there's no Prime Minister's questions. So we bring you fantasy Prime Minister's questions instead, talking about today's hot political topics. Joining me now, former Conservative Minister Lord Ed Vaizey and former Labour MP for Grimsby Melanie On. It is great to see you both. Ed, imagine that you are transported back to the green benches for one day only. You've got a question for the Prime Minister. What would you ask?
Well, if we're talking about Boris Johnson, I'd say, why haven't I been invited to the wedding celebrations at Lord Bamford's palatial residence somewhere in Gloucestershire? But more seriously, I would probably... the great thing about Prime Minister's questions is you try and use a hook that's quite compelling. I am a Conservative, and I do support the Conservative Party still, despite everything. So I might say, today is the 10th anniversary of the opening of the Olympic ceremony at which Boris Johnson was present. What three things are better in Britain today than they were 10 years ago? I'd probably have tipped him off the day before so that he had them at the ready.
You're telling us all the tricks. When you want to help your leader, you give them a little tip-off so they can prepare a great answer, and actually you get a better answer too. By the way, Ed, before I ask the same question of Mel, why aren't you invited to Boris Johnson's wedding party?
No one can explain it to me, Gloria. It's a mystery wrapped in an enigma. What is going on? I mean, I worked with Carrie Simmons. I defended Boris Johnson over Partygate. Haven't I done enough to get invited to this party?
Well, we're glad that you've made your appeal live on GB News. Maybe we'll get that sorted for you. Melanie On, it's great to see you. What would you be asking if you were back on those green benches today?
Lovely to see you, Gloria. Hi, Ed. I would be asking about the cost of living crisis. It is affecting people incredibly deeply at the moment. People are worried about how they are going to make ends meet. And I think that it's something that tax cuts that the Tory leadership candidates are now talking about really are not going to deliver the savings that people need in their pockets now. So as that cost of living crisis really deepens, what action can be taken quickly to try and help people out of this hole?
And Mel, I'll put that point to Ed, but before I let you, before I cross to Ed, just wondering, do you actually wish that you were back on the green benches ever?
I sometimes think about it. Sometimes, but I think I'm very busy with my new job and throwing myself into that. I do keep a really close interest, and I've been watching the debates and listening to the candidates as they're appearing on TV and all of their campaigns and stuff like that. So, yes, obviously still interested. It felt like the time that I was in Parliament, that period, it was incredibly tense and not particularly pleasurable. And I'm not sure things have improved since I got kicked out.
Right. So, Ed, obviously a big contest going on concerning the future of your party. Now, you entered Parliament as you were close to David Cameron. You served in his government. David Cameron, he undertook a big task to try and detoxify the image of the Conservative Party. Is it getting retoxified right now?
I think it is, to be frank with you, yes. I mean, I think this infighting, obviously, between Rishi and Liz Truss is not very edifying, and that's a divided party, but that can be true of any party, and the fighting between Gordon Brown and Tony Blair didn't help. But I think that Brexit, you know, I'm a Remainer, so I'm biased here, but I think Brexit has toxified the Tory party in the sense that there's this kind of ideological purity test which never really existed before. The Tory party was always quite a broad church of whether you're a true Brexiteer or not. And you have the bizarre situation of Remainer Liz Truss now being seen as the true Brexiteer. So I think that's toxified it. I think the war on woke has toxified it a bit. I mean, you know, David Cameron introduced gay marriage, and the message there was that whatever your life is like, you know, Britain is a welcoming country that accepts you for who you are, if that doesn't sound too awful. So I think the kind of trying to call out these kind of woke issues, I realise I'm talking on GBNews here, which probably spends quite a lot of time on these issues, but I think
we are the home of debate,
quite a lot of divides as well. So I do think, you know, what we tried to do with David Cameron, and I started this process shortly after the defeat in 1997, it's not just about centrist politics, which often puts people off, but it's about accepting what Britain is like and accepting that, you know, social change happens almost despite politics, and that politicians should work with what the country is rather than what they want it to be, rather than this kind of nostalgic throwback to the sort of 19th century days of empire. There are many great things about this country which are true about a modern 21st century open, liberal, democratic society that we should be proud of in Britain. We shouldn't be kind of looking to our history to constantly, validate ourselves. And I think that was the line that David Cameron took, was to say, you may find, you know, some Tory members might find New Labour kind of nauseating and trendy, but actually New Labour is succeeding mainly because it's completely in tune with how people are living their lives in the late 1990s. And that's what any party that wants to win power should be doing, in my view.
Mm-hmm. Mel, just to reflect on Boris Johnson's legacy, and one thing which I think actually we would all welcome was that focus. You can argue about whether it was delivered, but the focus on levelling up. That's something that we haven't really seen at the top of any Prime Minister's agenda, to talk about the sort of constituencies which you represented, which I used to represent, both now in the hands of Conservatives. That's absent. But has levelling up happened in Grimsby?
I think that there are some signs that efforts have been made, but the delivery has not really rolled out, certainly at the speed that people expected. And now we're 3 years down the line since Boris Johnson was re-elected, 2.5 if you're going to be pedantic about it. But those changes really haven't happened, and people expected more than just a little bit of a facelift in some areas. They wanted that to mean real change and depth of change and growth of opportunities. And as yet, I just don't think that that's filtering through to the vast majority of people who are in those seats that chose to vote Conservative in 2019. And I think it was a particular brand of conservatism. You know, it was Boris Johnson that they were voting for. You know, his kind of enthusiasm and his energy to bring about change in those areas. And I think that they were led astray, really, because some of the issues are incredibly deep-seated. They can't be turned around overnight. And the promises that were made were that, get Brexit done, all of your public services will be properly funded with the money coming back from that, and then we'll be able to cut red tape and deliver lots of new jobs and lots of opportunity. And the reality for lots of people is that they are really struggling, that the job landscape has not significantly shifted to make them feel like they have got more opportunity. And I think there's been a bit of a lack of focus on education and skills that actually is needed to get people up to a level where companies are prepared to invest, to grow, and get people in those local areas into those jobs. And I think there was just a report out yesterday that showed that still the Southeast and London in particular, in terms of funding coming from government and other various sources, is still outstripping the rest of the country enormously. Yep. And that isn't a good legacy for Boris Johnson.
We'll talk about whether Keir Starmer is the person who can restore the faith in those areas and the voters in those areas which abandoned Labour last time. But first of all, Ed, I want to know who you're backing for the Tory leadership and why.
Well, I'm backing Rishi Sunak, although as this campaign gets underway, I'm not expecting him to win. I think Liz Truss now has a pretty strong lead with the membership, and it's very hard for Rishi to overcome that. But I backed him from the very beginning, as to put it bluntly, is the only grown-up in the room. I mean, the guy is deeply, deeply impressive figure. I've come up against him once or twice on policy issues in the last couple of years, and although, in my view, he was taking the wrong decision, he was at least fully briefed on those issues and could argue his case. And it's a very boring point to make, but I just want a Prime Minister who's on top of his brief and who can have a conversation with the Health Secretary or the Education Secretary about what their plans are, hold them to account and follow through on them, and has a clear and realistic agenda. So that's why I back him. I think he would just be a pretty impressive Prime Minister. And I think this country, I think he was right when he said he would govern as though we were in a national emergency. We are facing this extraordinary cost of living crisis, potentially runaway inflation, significant debt, trying to get Brexit right, as we've seen at Dover, all sorts of issues that just really need hard graft and attention to detail. And it's not something that wins you votes. It's extremely boring pitch for a Prime Minister, which is probably why I'm not advising him. But that's what I want. And I think Rishi Sunak is head and shoulders, metaphorically speaking, above the other candidates.
Well, I'll come back to you on the fact that Conservative Party members do not seem to agree with any looking at the polling. But Mel, let's look at Sir Keir Starmer. Can he be trusted? He made all these pledges when he was standing for the Labour leadership. He made these promises to Labour members on taxing the rich, on nationalising rail and mail, on scrapping universal credit. What's happened to them all?
Can I just say, if I was Rishi Sunak and I heard Ed then just basically throwing my campaign under a bus, I'd be really quite distressed. Perhaps he hasn't helped himself with his U-turn on VAT, which seems to me to have lost him every rebuttal or every attack line in any future debate that he's going to have with Liz Truss. But yeah, I'd be really disappointed with Ed on my team championing.
Melanie, I'm commenting as an observer, but I think you're right about his VAT cut. I think that was a terrible tactical error to make that, because he's just completely held himself below the waterline in terms of Liz Truss's campaign attacks on him.
Yeah, everything that he said up till now is like just completely abandoned. But onto the point about Keir, I mean, I think Keir's had a really tough job. You know, the detoxifying that David Cameron and George Osborne undertook for the Conservatives ahead of 2010 is pretty much what Keir Starmer has had to undertake for the Labour Party. You know, you and I, both casualties in different ways, one by choice, one less by choice. But you know, we suffered the worst electoral defeat in 100 years. And that is the seriousness of the situation for the Labour Party. And I don't envy Keir Starmer at all, but the point that Ed made earlier about making sure that your party is in tune with the country is really important. And, politics isn't static. Nothing is ever static. So you do have to change and evolve and move with that. Now, whether or not he manages to take the party with him, and I'm sure that some of the comments that have been made in interviews that I've heard over the last few days from senior Labour representatives will have raised some eyebrows. And I noticed that Labour Party headquarters was very quick to kind of jump out and defend Rachel Reeves, but say that she hadn't heard a question properly on one of the main breakfast shows when she was talking about renationalisation programmes. There is something, still a tension within the Labour Party about what it is and what it stands for. And until Keir Starmer really sets that out and gives us that real vision and gets the cut through, he's not going to succeed. So perhaps he will find himself in a position of being a kind of caretaker leader until somebody else comes to the fore as and when that happens. But in terms of taking the Labour Party into the next general election, the Labour Party will not do well if they try and change leader before the next general election.
Okay, interesting. One word answer from you.
I have
Final
to say,
question.
Melanie, if I was Keir Starmer, I'd be very disappointed in your endorsement of him there.
I think
just to get my own back. Just to get my own back.
You two are great fun, but I think you two have to come back soon because you're great fun, and I think this double act could see some mileage.
Put Melanie on Rishi's campaign and me on Keir's.
Ed Vaizey, Melanie on, you've been fantastic. Come back again soon. Now, as more rail strikes cause chaos for commuters and travellers around the country, our reporter talks to former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn and union boss Mike Lynch. Before that, let's take a look at the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Dry for most today, but it does turn increasingly cloudy. And there will be the odd shower, however, for the vast majority. High pressure is keeping things settled. That high pressure now centred across the UK. That means lighter winds compared with earlier in the week. And we started the day with plenty of sunshine. It was a fresh start following a clear night, but the cloud is already starting to build. We've got medium cloud moving in from the southwest and also areas of cloud developing inland. And so with that cloud thickening up, always the chance of the odd shower, say for the Midlands, the southeast, more especially northern Scotland. But for the vast majority, it is going to stay dry. We'll see some bright spells. 24 in London, 18 to 19 for Glasgow, Edinburgh and Belfast. And then into the evening, the cloud thins and breaks in southern and northern areas, but in central parts, so for parts of North Wales, the North Midlands, northern England and eventually Northern Ireland, we'll see the cloud thicken and some outbreaks of rain will turn up. That rain fairly showery, but it will be some heavy bursts in places and it will keep the temperatures a bit higher compared with the previous night. Still, potential for some single-figure temperatures as we start off Thursday in the south and the north, but in between, areas of cloud, showers moving across northern England into southern Scotland as well. The rain tending to ease later, brighter skies coming along and temperatures still reaching the mid-20s in the south, high teens and around 20 Celsius at best for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Further showers drifting north into central and southern Scotland during Thursday evening. Clear spells breaking out for Northern Ireland, Wales, central and southern England, as well as the far north of Scotland. And then Friday brings with it further showers in the north and west. And Saturday and Sunday it turns warmer in the south.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio,
on digital, absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well.
I feel like I could take on the world.
Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Well, our summer of disruption continues as we face another day of rail strikes today, with train services operating at a 20% capacity. Joining me from outside Euston Station in London is our national reporter, Paul Hawkins. Paul, you've been speaking to some of the key players today, haven't you?
Yeah, afternoon, Gloria. Yes, I have indeed. We'll hear from Mick Lynch, the boss of the RMT, in just a moment. Also, we'll hear from former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, who now sits in the Commons as an independent. They were here this morning. Also, John McDonnell, Labour MP, former Shadow Chancellor, and interestingly, Sam Tarry, who was here earlier. Now, he's a Shadow Transport Minister. He gave a series of interviews this morning. He was defying the line from Sir Keir Starmer that none of the front bench should be on the picket lines. Also, in one interview, he maybe it was a slip of the tongue, but he called himself the Shadow Transport Secretary. Reportedly, the whips will be calling him today about why he was here this morning. So difficult for Labour. But look, this is the fourth day of industrial action in 5 weeks. The dispute hasn't really evolved. It's still a familiar story. On the one hand, you've got the train operating companies, Network Rail and the government saying, look, we want to change terms and conditions. We want to make a change to pay, etc. We need to modernise the railways, etc. The offer on the table in terms of a pay increase, 8%, effectively 8% over the next 3 years, with terms and conditions attached. The RMT, also unions like the TSSA, who are on strike here today as well, and ASLEF on Saturday, saying that, look, 8% over the next 3 years, that's still nowhere near what we need for our members to match inflation. You're still 3 or 4% short, and we don't like the terms and conditions that are attached. So they're claiming that their employers want some people to work permanent night shifts. Now, the unions are saying, look, our members didn't sign up for permanent night shifts. They will work them on a rota pattern, sometimes nights, sometimes weekends, sometimes day shifts, but we're not going to completely work nights. Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, he's accused the unions of being militant. You know, he's referring to them as barons. He's saying that the unions don't want to modernise, they don't want to reform, that effectively they're kind of a relic of the past. Mick Lynch, the boss of the RMT, however, disagrees. Here's what he told me earlier.
Well, he wants massive cuts. When he wanted the railway workers to keep working and put themselves in a place of danger, in effect, he wanted to talk to us. Now he's using COVID and the effects of COVID as a reason to cut back on the railway. He's cut £2 billion worth of funding from the National Rail, and he's cutting £2 billion from London Underground, in effect. Now that's causing massive disruption, and it's that funding cut that he's responsible for that is causing these disputes. If we can get back to a proper funding level and he allows the companies to negotiate properly, we will get a settlement to this dispute. But he's got the key.
How have you felt about the way Labour have been dealing with these disputes, the way Keir Starmer's been talking about it? He says that if there was a Labour government, they would get round the table and try and, you know, grease the wheels of the negotiations and get a deal struck. But he's explicitly told members of the Shadow Cabinet not to come on the picket lines. How have you felt about the way Labour's management have dealt with this?
Well, as a member of the Shadow Cabinet here this morning, and I believe that many Labour MPs are on our picket lines right across the country in their constituencies. I don't know what Keir Starmer's doing. He doesn't phone me up and tell me...
Would you like to see more support from him, though?
I would like to see more support from Keir Starmer. I think he needs to support working class people, because working class people are struggling in this economy right now and have been for nearly a decade. Public sector workers are struggling, and also private sector workers. So he needs to ride that summer of solidarity that we're seeing, with many trade unions coming into campaigns and actions. People want a square deal from corporate Britain, and they're not getting one. And Keir Starmer needs to stand up and identify himself with our campaign and the other campaigns in the economy at the minute. I think he should do that, and it will do him some good in the working class communities that lost out in the last election and who lent their votes to the Tories but can be won back for Labour.
So I think what Mick Lynch from the RMT had to say there was really interesting, that criticism of Keir Starmer effectively kind of neutralising that familiar attack line from the Conservatives, that this is a Keir Starmer supported strike, a Labour supported strike. Keir Starmer, though, I've just waited as an ambulance files past me at the moment. Very busy, as you can imagine, here in central London. Lots of emergency vehicles making their way backwards and forwards this morning, but that familiar attack line from the Conservatives, as I was saying, is that these strikes are supported by Keir Starmer and Labour. Keir Starmer trying to distance at least the front bench from these strikes, saying that they're encouraging all sides to get around the negotiating table. But look, a dozen MPs plus the Shadow Transport Minister Sam Tarry here earlier today, and also former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, now sitting as an independent in the House of Commons. He told me why he came down here earlier this morning.
We're here today to support the rail workers. They are faced with job losses, insufficient pay and insecurity in the future. That can't be right. They've taken a vote by an overwhelming majority to authorise the union to call strike action. They've done that today, and I'm here to support them. Because in reality, the RMT today is speaking for an awful lot of other people who are worried about their own future, about their jobs, and about low levels of pay in this country at a time of very high inflation. This sort of idea of a union baron is really weird. Mick Lynch was elected as the General Secretary of the union. He's up for re-election at some point in the future. There's a democratic mandate there. The union consulted its members by ballot, publicly accountable ballot. Far more people voted than vote for politicians in any election, and they have the authority to take the action. I think there should be some respect for that democratic process. We have a cost of living crisis. We have more people accessing food banks than ever before. We have more food banks than there are branches of McDonald's in this country. We have a mental health crisis. We have people living in desperate poverty, and we have a growth of the billionaire class in Britain. Surely there is a bit of an answer here. One is close down the tax havens. Secondly, tax those that can afford to pay more at the top end in order to pay for the improvements we need in public services, and bring these heavily subsidised monopolies into public ownership.
Yeah. And would you like to see Keir Starmer talking about that sort of thing more?
I think that's what the Labour Party should always be talking about. You've got to resonate with people as to where they are. Those people that are having trouble paying their bill when they get to the till at the supermarket, they're the people we should be speaking to and for.
Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss?
That's up to them to decide whatever they want to do. I just advise them to read the history of Ted Heath and Margaret Thatcher, both of whom tried to bring in the most draconian anti-trade union laws and ended up losing.
Paul Hawkins bringing us some outstanding interviews there. Now, the Commonwealth Games start tomorrow in Birmingham. West Midlands Mayor Andy Street joins me next. First, it is your news update with Rosie.
It's 12:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Commuters are facing travel disruption across the country today as rail workers go on strike again. More than 40,000 members of the RMT union and 14 train operators have walked out in a long-running dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. Picket lines have been formed outside stations across the country as union members from Network Rail and 14 train operators went on strike. Network Rail says only 20% of services are running and some places have no trains at all today. England are through to the Women's Euro 2022 final after beating Sweden 4-0. It was Beth Mead, Lucy Bronze, Alessia Rousseau and Fran Kirby who all scored, ending a 13-year run of defeats whenever they got to a final four of a major tournament. The Lionesses will now face either France or Germany in the final on Sunday at Wembley. The second head-to-head leadership debate between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss came to an abrupt end last night after the host collapsed. Kate McCann fainted whilst live on air, forcing Talk TV to cut away from the studio. We've heard that she is fine, but the rest of the debate was cancelled. Before the incident, the candidates clashed over tax, with Miss Truss criticising Rishi Sunak of hitting the public by raising national insurance. The government's drive to recruit an extra 20,000 police officers in England and Wales by next March has slowed down in the last 3 months. Home Office figures show 214 officers were recruited in the last 3 months. 2,500 officers had been recruited in the 3 months before that. That brings the total now to just over 13,500 officers. A McDonald's cheeseburger is no longer 99p. The fast food giants increased the price for the first time in more than 14 years, blaming rising costs and inflation. It's now 20 pence more expensive, coming in at £1.19. In a statement, McDonald's says a number of items on sale in their UK restaurants will go up by anything from 10 to 20 pence. It's the latest company to announce increasing prices after inflation hit a 40-year high. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Shortly, we'll be back to the briefing with Gloria.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
What a summer of sport we're enjoying. The Lionesses are in the Euros final on Sunday and the Commonwealth Games kick off in Birmingham tomorrow. It should bring a huge boost to the city, and I'm pleased to be joined now by the West Midlands Mayor, Andy Street. Andy, good to see you. So tomorrow, it's going to be quite a moment for Birmingham. Give us a sneak preview of what we're going to see.
Yes, you're right. We're actually all feeling very excited by it, Gloria. A bit daunted, you know, it's a big responsibility to be doing this. But the simple message is we are ready and we're looking forward to welcoming the world, really. So it's lots of sport, lots of hospitality, and it's the image of Birmingham and the West Midlands being projected all around the world.
What does it mean to Birmingham as a city?
Yeah. So we bid for this, obviously, back in 2017. and we're very confident when we bid. But actually, if you think what's happened in the nearly 5 years now intervening, I think it means the stakes are even higher for Birmingham and the West Midlands. So obviously we've had the ravages of COVID, we've got the war in Ukraine, we've even got, I'll call it, uncertainty about the British government and the future. But actually, it's an opportunity for this to be an incredible celebration. The thing about the best things in life, those values of sportsmanship, respect, bringing people together from so many different backgrounds. So actually what it means to us is a wonderful privilege, but also a great responsibility to do it really well.
And it's been years in planning, as you said, but how significant an impact will the rail strike have?
Well, the RMT, to be fair, are on strike today, and they're not till after the games. And actually, I do thank them for avoiding the games. ASLEF is a different matter. We've got one-day strike on Saturday, and that coincides with nearly all of our sporting venues happening. But there is a contingency plan that we have in place. So simple message, if you are coming to Birmingham from the games long distance, Avanti, Cross Country, Chiltern still running as normal. When you get to the West Midlands, unfortunately, our train service is on strike, but there will be separate buses. We've got about 600 additional buses available to run a contingency plan. So we will make sure you get to the games using public transport, despite the rail strike.
And just finally, while we have you, who are you backing for the Conservative leadership? It's quite a contest.
I thought we were talking about Commonwealth Games. So the answer is I've not decided yet. I was initially in the Jeremy Hunt camp and was very pleased to be very proud of that. But what I've done now is I've laid out some tests really for the leaders to say, how are you going to back the West Midlands around levelling up, around net zero, around our industrial strength? And I'm waiting for their answers. Then I'll give you my decision before the ballots go out next Tuesday.
That's kind. OK, finally, just this is your opportunity to celebrate Birmingham. For people who are coming to Birmingham, who don't know the city, what's special about Birmingham that they're going to encounter? What does Birmingham have that nowhere else does?
Oh, it's got lots of history, hasn't it? So, but the thing I think that they will see tomorrow, wherever they come from and around the world, is an incredible warm welcome. We're a modest, self-effacing place, but actually, this is the place in the world where communities from 190 countries, many of them in the Commonwealth, coexist and thrive together. And I know that everyone who comes here will be able to sense the pride, the authenticity that comes in this city and region. So we're hugely welcoming, and we're looking forward to seeing people from everywhere. 1.2 million tickets sold. It's a great opportunity for us to show that warmth of our welcome.
I did my degree in Birmingham. Come on, you've got to give a plug to the Birmingham Balti.
Of course, the Birmingham Balti, some of the finest dining as well, some of the best street food in the world here, you name it. But just about every cuisine you could possibly want. So, and also if you're staying for a longer time, all the tourist attractions there are, from Cadbury World to the canals to the Sea Life Centre, you name it. You can have a wonderful, I'm going to say, a weekend break, even a summer holiday here. And 1.2 million people are doing it, and 1.5 billion people will be watching Birmingham and the West Midlands around the world. So that's a great advantage of the honour to host the Commonwealth Games. A great cash boost for the city too. Huge. So let's be clear. This costs a lot to put on. The total budget is about £1 billion. 3/4 of it paid for by the British government, but it wasn't done out of charity. This is done out of a hard-nosed business case. You get that back in the tourists who come and spend money, but you also get it back on the business investment you win on the back of it. And we'll be hosting a big business festival for the 10 days, concentrating on lots of the areas where we're going to be brilliant in the future. We hope you have a brilliant Commonwealth Games. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and really good to have you on the show today. Andy Street, the West Midlands Mayor. Good luck. Thanks a lot, Gloria. We're looking forward to it. Now, a report into the cost of living by the Work and Pensions Select Committee recommends a pause in deductions from benefits to give extra breathing space to struggling families. Stephen Timms, chair of the Work and Pensions Committee, is here to take us through the report. Stephen, always good to see you on the show. So your committee is calling for much needed breathing space to those who need it by pausing these deductions. Just give us some examples about how overpayments and such are made.
Well, the background is that we all know we're going to be in a very difficult time in the next few months. Electricity bills going to rise sharply again in October. Things are going to get tighter, other prices going up. So, yes, we've called for the government to pause these automatic deductions from universal credit. They did this during the pandemic, so we know they can do it. We think they should do it again, given the difficulties people are going to be facing in the next few months. And often what happens is people on universal credit had a tax credit overpayment sometimes years ago, which no one ever told them about. Suddenly, money starts being taken out of their universal credit to repay that debt. And it makes life very, very difficult, particularly at a time like this. So there are 2 million people altogether, almost half of the people claiming universal credit who are having deductions made at the moment. The government itself says to companies they ought to look at reducing debt repayments at the moment, writing off some of the debts. We think the government needs to take its own advice and apply it to the DWP so that these deductions are, as they were in the pandemic, paused for the time being until inflation comes down to a lower level.
I'm guessing the government would say that they have provided significant help to the most vulnerable families. Almost all of the 8 million most vulnerable households will get support of at least £1,200.
Yes, and that help is going to be very, very important. It's going to help a lot of people get through who otherwise really would have been in a dreadful situation this autumn. But things are still going to be very tight, and we think pausing the deductions would be the right thing to do. We also think the government needs to look at the level of the benefit cap that was introduced in 2013. It's only ever changed once in 2016 when it was lowered. And we think it's ridiculous at a time when inflation is 10 or 11% that benefits are capped at the level less than the level that was set 9 years ago. That needs to be looked at. There's another point we're making about pensioner households. 850,000 pensioner households are eligible for pension credit but not claiming it. If they do claim it now, before the 18th of August, they'll be entitled to £650, the pensioners' cost of living payment. So it's really important that everyone who's eligible for that benefit do put in an application in the next couple of weeks so that they get that extra help as well.
That's really interesting. Why do you think so many pensioners who are entitled to that help don't get it? Is it too complex a system? I'm actually going through it myself for my mum at the moment. So, I know you need to have a computer, which is why I'm doing it for a start. That's difficult for some pensioners who are not online, isn't it?
It is difficult for some pensioners. A lot of pensioners just don't know about it. They maybe feel that, they're not as badly off as some other people they know, and they don't realise that help is available. But it's really worth checking that out because it can be quite a lot of help for pensioner households during what we know is going to be a really tough several months ahead. And if you do it now, you can get that extra £650, which is going to be paid out from the Treasury in the next few weeks.
Information. Final point, we haven't got much time left, but just on pausing the sort of recovery of overpaid cash. It is taxpayers' cash. I mean, it should be paid back at some point, shouldn't it?
Yeah, we're only saying the deductions should be paused, which, as I say, is what the government did in the pandemic. So there's a good precedent for it. We know the next few months are going to be extraordinarily tight. And we think it's right, as the government has advised companies to do, that there should be a pause on these deductions from benefits at the moment.
Stephen Timms, Chair of the Work and Pension Select Committee, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, a powerful committee of MPs has strongly criticised the government's awarding of contracts to the coronavirus testing company Randox, saying record-keeping was woefully inadequate. Contracts totalling £777 million were given to the company over a 2-year period, but the Public Accounts Committee said basic practices of transparency were not followed. Chairwoman, dear Meg Hillier, spoke to our political correspondent Tom Harwood, and he first asked her whether she agreed that the extraordinary circumstances of the early pandemic means it was understandable that normal scrutiny wasn't applied.
No, I mean, what we're really clear about is that absolutely there was an emergency and there were clear rules in place that allowed government to let contracts without competition, to let them urgently, Those rules were in place even before the Coronavirus Act. The Coronavirus Act embedded some of that as well. But when that happens, it's even more important that you keep records of decisions that are made, who was in the room when those things were discussed. And what is clear here is there's huge gaps in the paper trail on everything from contract negotiation to decisions to which meetings ministers were in and who they were having those meetings with. And we have this system to make sure that the system is fair. And without that track record and that information, it's a real concern because it shows that there was sloppiness in the system.
Someone like Dominic Cummings might have said, and has said over the course of the last few years, that the meticulous note-taking culture of Whitehall may well have slowed down the response in some areas. Is it not a valid criticism to suggest that if there was all of this record-taking going on, there might have been a slower response?
No, look, it's not. Some of this is just that's throwing up sand, really. I mean, when we've looked at other issues, for example, just even a recording of why a decision was made to, in that case, perhaps elect one company rather than another, wouldn't have been difficult to record when decisions were made. The very basics that weren't in place for many of these things. And it's actually incredible not to have things like managing conflicts of interests for ministers, making sure that there were records of who was in the room with the minister, who they met with. Those records were just missing in many cases, particularly in this case. And we've had this has been a particularly pressing issue because overall test and trace cost a lot of money. These contracts that were let, the two that we particularly focused on in our report, amount to a lot of money let without competition. Taxpayers' money, remember, given by taxpayers on faith, on trust that the government would spend it properly. I think it's the basic that taxpayers should be able to see that those decisions were made with probity, fairly, and there was nothing untoward. But without the documentation, you can't prove that.
So when we're looking at what the government should have done, in your view, that it didn't do, it is that note-taking?
Well, it's not just, it's a bit more than note-taking. The note-taking is the end of a proper process which says we have rules about how we let things. If we decide to do things outside those normal rules, we need to be clear about why we've made that decision, who's got that decision, and also each step of the way. In this case, a second contract was let to Randox without competition in October of 2020. So when things were a little bit more business as usual with COVID, then you should be looking at how the first contracts worked, maybe testing the market again, benchmarking to check that you're not just giving it to a company because you're already working with them, but you are actually driving value for money. Because every tax pound is a pound that could be spent on something else. And let's remember that the total cost of COVID is over twice the normal NHS budget for a year. So this is a lot of taxpayers' money, over £300 billion of taxpayers' money in total. So it's really important that that's watched. And I don't think we should take that lightly, actually. It's easy for people to say, oh, we're in a hurry. These are people spending what you might call other people's money, but it's your money, my money, Tom and the viewers' money. And we need to make sure that that's properly accounted for.
Now, your report mentions £777 million that your committee is unsure was spent properly. It sounds like an absolutely enormous sum, but in the context of wider government spending, just how much is £777 million equivalent to?
Well, I mean, you could break it down into number of hospitals that could be built or schools. But if you look at, as I say, the total funding for the NHS in a year is 150 billion. Well, that was before COVID. It's gone up since. So this doesn't, in billions, in COVID, millions sound like a lot less. But look, viewers are struggling with the cost of living. Fuel bills are going up. Food prices are going up. So every penny, that's being argued about at the moment in the Conservative leadership contest, our next Prime Minister is having a discussion, well, they're discussing between themselves and with their party members, how they're going to help people, or say they're going to help people. Some of that, 777 million, would be a great help. Now, we don't know that it was spent wrongly, but what we're saying is you need to, if you're spending that amount of money, be really clear that you are getting value for money and that you can prove that after the event. And during the event, indeed. And I think that's what's really key here, that it is about taxpayers' money. And you can't just say, oh, well, it doesn't matter if it was an emergency. You still got to say, even in an emergency, we were mindful that we were the custodians of your money to deliver a programme for you. And we want to prove to you that we've done the best we can on that. And without the paperwork, we can't prove that they have the proper processes in place.
Now, you spend almost every waking hour trying to make sure that there is value for money in government spending, poring over all of these different decisions. But you're also a Labour Member of Parliament. And can I just ask you, with your Labour MP hat on, if you believe that nationalising the railways or energy companies or water companies would be similar value for money?
Well, let's be really clear that would be a hugely costly exercise. And I'm very clear that if Labour got into government, let's say in 2 years' time when we expect there might be a general election, my priority and the priority of Keir Starmer and the Labour Party is to make a difference to people's lives in the immediate term. I suspect the cost of living crisis won't be over then. The people will have been hammered by COVID and the cost of living. These are issues that mean that they need support in the here and the now. And overnight, spending a lot of taxpayers' money nationalising these big organisations, water, energy, and so on, would be very costly, but you wouldn't see an immediate difference for the consumer and the taxpayer. So our priority would absolutely have to be things that make a difference today, tomorrow, next week, next year, the quick things that needed to be done. And with we won't know what exactly the state of the coffers will be. We've got a Dutch auction going on between two future potential prime ministers. We need to see what's in the coffers before we could make any commitments, even on the basics. And I think we would have to be focused on a few key things that would really impact and make a difference to people. And I think the major nationalisation programmes are very expensive and take a long while to deliver any benefit.
Meg Hillier, thank you.
That was Tom Howard speaking to Meg Hillier earlier. Now, in response to the Public Accounts Committee report, Randox said that it had issued a legal complaint calling the findings deeply flawed and wrong in assumptions it makes and the conclusions it draws. In supporting the UK's urgent requirement for coronavirus testing, Randox reacted with speed, efficiency and flexibility in delivering value. Thanks to all of you who've been in touch today. Stephen said unions holding this country to ransom yet again. Real companies should simply tell unions no. Carol says there's a lot of talk about how little the Prime Minister achieved in nearly 3 years. 2 years were lost to COVID and lockdown. There appears to be complete amnesia about the impact of COVID and lockdown and unrealistic expectations of what should have been achieved in the circumstances. Alan has been in touch with the country having been in lockdown for 2 years and the economy crippled. Is it little wonder levelling up has stalled? It is still the case that this concept is the most important facing the government. You have been watching and listening to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. I'm back every Monday to Thursday from noon. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan. But for now, it's time to take a look at your weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Dry for most today, but it does turn increasingly cloudy and there will be the odd shower, however, for the vast majority. High pressure is keeping things settled. That high pressure now centred across the UK. That means lighter winds compared with earlier in the week, and we started the day with plenty of sunshine. It was a fresh start following a clear night, but the cloud is already starting to build. We've got medium cloud moving in from the southwest and also areas of cloud developing inland, and so with that cloud thickening up, always the chance of the odd shower, say for the Midlands, the southeast, more especially northern Scotland. But for the vast majority, it is going to stay dry. We'll see some bright spells. 24 in London, 18 to 19.